I went to the airport with my daughter-in-law and my grandson to welcome my son, who was returning after a year of working overseas. Suddenly, a security guard approached me and asked, "Ma'am, where is the woman who was with you?" I was surprised. "You mean my daughter-in-law? She just went into the restroom." Through the guard's radio, I heard a cold voice say, "She just ran out toward the exit. Team G, proceed to surround her." I stood there paralyzed, not understanding what was happening, and quickly pulled out my phone to call her, but she did not answer. The phone was turned off. 15 minutes later, the international arrivals area was in chaos. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching this video from. We would love to know how far our stories of revenge travel. The noise of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport surrounded me, but in my mind, only one sound resonated: the announcement that the flight from London had landed. I had been there with my daughter-in-law, Nia Imani, and my grandson, Jelani, for nearly an hour, sitting patiently under the massive electronic board. And then the line I had waited for most appeared, glowing in a hopeful green. Landed. It had been exactly 1 year since I said goodbye to Kwesi, my son, when he left to work abroad. Right here in this same airport, I felt a joy difficult to describe, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I squeezed Jelani's small hand tightly. The boy looked up at me with those big eyes full of enthusiasm. "Mama Eudora, I'm going to the restroom for a moment," Nia Imani said suddenly, her tone more hurried than usual. "I'm feeling a little off." I nodded, all my attention already focused on the international arrivals gate, where my son would be walking out shortly. I smiled to myself, completely forgetting that Nia Imani had walked away. About 5 minutes passed, and a man in a security uniform approached. He looked different from the usual patrol employees. His uniform was more formal, and above all, his gaze was sharp, as if he were on an important mission. He did not look directly at me. His eyes scanned the area, and then he lowered his voice to ask an unexpected and strange question. "Ma'am, where is the woman who was with you?" I was surprised and reflexively pointed toward the restroom area. "You mean my daughter-in-law? She just went into the restroom." As soon as I finished speaking, a burst of static came from the radio on his shoulder. Then another voice, cold and clear, cut through the airport noise. "She just ran out toward Gate G. Proceed to close off the perimeter." The officer was startled. His expression changed completely, from inquisitive to extremely tense. He nodded and then looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and scrutiny. A chill ran down my spine. What is going on? With trembling hands, I pulled out my cell phone and quickly dialed Nia Imani's number. The tone rang only once before going straight to voicemail, as if someone had turned off the phone instantly. My heart began to beat wildly. At the same time, from different points in the terminal, dozens of men moved quickly with weapons in hand and badges on their chests, spreading out through the entire waiting area. The passengers began to notice something strange. Murmurs could be heard. Some backed away in fear. Others raised their phones to record. I hugged Jelani tightly. The boy started to get scared and buried his face in my chest. And then, in the middle of all that chaos, my son appeared. Kwesi walked out through the arrivals gate. He looked thinner and tanned, but his smile was just as I remembered it in my thoughts. He was pushing a luggage cart full of suitcases, and in his other hand he held a small, carefully wrapped gift bag. His eyes searched eagerly through the crowd. When his eyes met mine, his smile grew even more dazzling. He raised his hand to wave and started walking quickly toward us, leaving the cart behind. "Mama! Jelani!" When he was only 15 feet away from us, 2 people lunged at him from the sides. "Are you Kwesi Vance?" a cold voice asked. Kwesi stood paralyzed, the smile frozen on his lips. He nodded, still looking bewildered. "Yes, that's me. What's happening?" The sound of handcuffs clicked dry and cruel, locking firmly around his wrists. The gift bag fell to the floor and its contents scattered everywhere. Everyone around me fell silent. "What are you doing?" I screamed, my mind shattered. I grabbed Jelani, who was already crying loudly, and ran toward my son. "Let my son go! You have the wrong man!" Kwesi was completely beside himself, trying to pull away in vain, his face twisted with fear. "Why? What did I do wrong?" A burly officer stopped me. His arm was like an iron clamp. His voice was monotone, without emotion, like a machine. "Mrs. Vance, calm down. He has been arrested for being linked to an international fraud ring. Please accompany us to the station to give a statement." My ears were ringing. The world that minutes before was overflowing with joy for the reunion was now crumbling completely. I could only watch as they took my son away, with his hands cuffed behind his back, amidst camera flashes and the curious stares of the entire airport. The police did not take me immediately to an interrogation room. They led me and Jelani to a small waiting room, sterile, perhaps reserved for special cases. Jelani was still sobbing in my arms. His tiny body trembled without stopping. I had to be strong for him. With a shaking hand, I dialed the number of Verna, my closest cousin in Atlanta. My voice was breaking. It didn't sound like mine anymore. "Verna, come to the airport right now. Come in through the international terminal. Ask for the security office. Take Jelani. Kwesi, I couldn't finish the sentence. My throat closed up. "The police took him into custody. I have to go." Verna arrived like a gust of wind, pale as a sheet. She didn't ask much, just nodded in silence and reached out her arms for Jelani. I felt like my heart was being ripped out when I had to pry my grandson's little fingers from my clothes one by one. "Grandma," he sobbed, "where are Daddy and Mommy?" He held on to me tightly, not wanting to let go. Finally, Verna had to carry him in her arms. His crying echoed down the hallway, a heartbreaking chorus. "Grandma, Daddy, Mommy," until their silhouettes disappeared behind the automatic doors. I was left alone in a terrifying silence. The ride to the police station was in complete silence. The car moved down the highway, but I saw nothing through the window. They took me down a long, cold hallway with fluorescent lights casting a pale glow on the shiny tile floor. The smell of disinfectant and old paper hit my nose. I sat on a hard plastic chair right in front of the gray steel door of the interrogation room. The door remained closed, silent as a grave, locking my son and the truth inside. A young female officer brought me a cup of water. Her eyes showed compassion. I nodded in thanks. My frozen hand grabbed the plastic cup, but I couldn't drink. My throat was dry. Yes, but it wasn't a thirst for water. It was a thirst for the truth. To keep from going crazy while I waited, to prevent the worst images from invading my mind, I forced myself to think, to reconstruct everything from the beginning. I am Eudora Vance, a retired literature teacher. My husband passed away 10 years ago. Since then, my world had shrunk to Kwesi and my grandson Jelani. Kwesi is a noble man, a talented carpenter, but too trusting, and Nia Imani, my daughter-in-law. I remember clearly the day Kwesi, radiant, told us he had an opportunity to work for a large furniture company in London. Nia Imani supported him immediately. She wrapped her arms around his neck, eyes shining with pride. "It's the best opportunity for him, Mama Eudora. Don't worry, I'll take care of you and Jelani." And for over a year, she kept her promise. Nia Imani was an exemplary daughter-in-law. She took care of me with dedication. She looked after Jelani at every meal, every bedtime. Her artisan crafts business was doing better and better. She was the pride of the whole family. But now, sitting in this cold chair, those small memories I previously considered insignificant came flooding back to my mind, sharp and terrifying. On those nights of insomnia typical of old age, I used to hear the soft sliding of the glass balcony door. Nia Imani would go out there, talking on the phone with someone. Her voice was so low, it was almost inaudible. Once, a gust of night wind blew my bedroom door slightly open. I managed to hear a few stray words that didn't sound at all like craft business topics. Package, clean. At that moment I dismissed it, thinking they were business terms I didn't understand. And then new items started appearing. A designer handbag that I knew cost the same as my pension for a month, extremely expensive sunglasses, a latest generation phone. Every time I asked, Nia Imani smiled with that radiant smile that erased all doubt. "It's a bonus the company gave me for finishing a special project, Mama. She even gave me a luxurious silk scarf. You deserve it," she told me. That smile, those words, now that I remember them, they give me chills. And then the clearest memory, the most painful one, came back like a giant wave. It was an autumn afternoon, about 3 months ago. I was watering my pots of geraniums in the hallway, right next to Nia Imani's home office. The door was ajar. Her voice could be heard with total clarity through the phone, a cold and calculating voice I had never heard from her before. "No, you can't use my account. It's too risky. Use Kwesi's. He's in London. He won't find out. The money will look cleaner that way." Cleaner. That word stuck in me like a dagger. A shiver ran down my spine. My hand trembled and almost dropped the watering can. I was about to knock on the door, enter, and demand an explanation, but my usual cowardice stopped me. I told myself, surely it's something about work, taxes, or something like that. I'm old. I don't understand these things. I shouldn't be suspicious without reason. I don't want her to get upset and break the harmony in the family. I walked away in silence, pretending I hadn't heard anything. I sat up abruptly in the plastic chair. The tick-tock of the hallway clock sounded constant, relentless. The interrogation room door was still closed. Remorse and unbearable fear squeezed my chest until I couldn't breathe. It's not that I didn't know. The truth is, I chose not to know. I covered my own eyes and ears to all the strange signs, just to maintain that false appearance of a happy family. And now my son is paying the price for my cowardice. Nearly 3 hours passed. I was still sitting in that hard plastic chair, my body numb. Then a sharp click broke the silence. The gray door of the interrogation room opened, but the person who came out wasn't my son. It was a man of about 50, dressed in an elegant suit, his salt and pepper hair perfectly combed. He had a broad forehead and a sharp gaze, with the authority of someone accustomed to handling terrible secrets. He looked nothing like the uniformed officers I had seen before. "Mrs. Vance." His voice was deep and calm. I nodded mechanically. "I am Detective Thorne, the lead investigator on this case." He said nothing else in the hallway, just signaled for me to follow him to a small nearby office. The room was tidy, with a window overlooking a gray interior courtyard. On the dark wood desk rested a thick file. On the cover was a white label with 2 words typed on it, Kwesi Vance. My heart sank. Detective Thorne didn't beat around the bush or offer meaningless pleasantries. He sat down, opened a file, and turned it toward me. The first page was a diagram full of lines, boxes, and numbers, like a giant spider web. "Mrs. Vance," he began, pointing a finger at a box in the center of that web where my son's name was. "In the last 14 months, the bank account in your son's name, Kwesi Vance, has received a total of over $2 million from 47 different accounts across the United States and Europe." $2 million. That number was like a lightning bolt splitting me in two. I shook my head, mouth open, but unable to utter a word. He turned to the next page, where there was a list of transactions. "That money," he continued in a flat tone like a news anchor, "was transferred almost immediately to accounts in Panama and the Cayman Islands. It is a classic money laundering process, ma'am. Very professional." "It can't be." I finally managed to say something. I stood up abruptly, leaning both hands on the table to keep from falling. My voice trembled, full of indignation. "My son is a carpenter. He only knows how to use his hands to sand wood, hammer nails, not to handle numbers. He doesn't even know how to use those complicated banking apps. How could he launder money? You are wrong. There has to be a mistake." Detective Thorne looked at me with a glimmer of compassion in his eyes, but his voice remained firm as steel. "We are very sorry, ma'am, but all the material evidence points in one single direction." He turned to another sheet where there was a scan of a business account opening contract. "This signature," He pointed to the line at the bottom. "It is your son's, isn't it?" It was Kwesi's signature, the letter slanting to the right, unmistakable. All account opening documents, all authorizations for international transfers bear the signature of Kwesi Vance. I let myself fall back into the chair, strengthless, as if something had hollowed me out inside. I looked at him, almost begging. "Please, let me see him, just 5 minutes. I need to hear it from his mouth." Detective Thorne hesitated for a moment, looked at my desperate eyes, then sighed and nodded. They took me to another area of the building, crossing hallways with cold bars. The sound of the officer's footsteps accompanying me echoed on the concrete floor. Kwesi was sitting in a small, empty room. There was only a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs. There were no windows. He wasn't handcuffed, but an officer guarded the door from the outside, his massive body blocking almost the entire glass window. When I entered, Kwesi looked up. His face was pale, drained of blood, his eyes red and swollen. The clothes he had worn at the airport, the ones he had chosen with such excitement to see the family again, were now wrinkled and disheveled. I sat in front of him, trembling, and took his cold hands. "Kwesi," I whispered. "What happened? Tell me the truth." Kwesi looked at me, eyes full of tears. His voice shook with shame. "Nia Imani. It was Nia Imani, Mama," he began to recount. She said she needed to open a business account to import artisan materials from Asia for her new business. I didn't understand any of that." He took a deep breath, trying to calm down. "The day before I flew to London, she met me at a coffee shop. She handed me a bunch of papers and rushed me. 'Sign quickly, baby. The lawyer's waiting. It has to be ready today so the merchandise arrives on time.' I glanced at the documents, saw the company name, saw the conditions, but it was all legal language. I didn't understand anything. I trusted her, Mama. I just thought I was helping her fulfill her dream." He rested his head on the metal table, shoulders shaking. "I signed without reading a single word properly, Mama. Where she pointed, I signed. I signed it all." A cruel and painful truth revealed itself, clear as day. My son, out of love and blind trust, became the scapegoat in the hands of his own wife. Just at that moment, the room door burst open. Detective Thorne entered with an expressionless face. "Time's up, ma'am." He glanced at Kwesi, who was slumped over, and then looked at me. His eyes now had a colder glint. "We just received an update. The woman who accompanied you at the airport, Nia Imani Vance, has been confirmed as the lead operator of this ring in the southeast region. She had her escape planned since before she detected our presence." He paused as if he wanted every word to stick in my mind, and delivered the final sentence, the one that destroyed whatever hope, however minimal, remained. "All transactions, all illicit money passed through accounts in your son's name. With the intellectual author legally a fugitive, Kwesi Vance will be processed for money laundering and for being an accomplice in an international fraud ring." A scapegoat. My son was the perfect scapegoat. An officer entered from outside and gently helped Kwesi stand up. My son didn't resist. He walked like a soulless shadow, stumbling. Upon reaching the door, he turned and looked at me one last time. In his eyes there was no anger, only absolute despair. I left the police station when the sky was already beginning to darken. The world continued its course. Cars rushed by, people walked as always, but my world had shattered into pieces. The first thing I did the next morning was look for a lawyer. It was my only hope at that moment. I went to the office of Mr. Sterling, a middle-aged attorney known for his good heart, recommended by an old friend. He received me in a cozy office with wooden shelves reaching the ceiling. He listened to my story with patience, even nodding occasionally with a sympathetic expression. But when I handed him the summary of charges that Detective Thorne had allowed me to photocopy, his kind smile faded. He read it over and over, frowned, and leaned back in his chair, interlacing his hands. "Mrs. Vance," he said politely, but with distance, "I am very sorry for what your family is going through, but this case is too complicated, and the evidence is too overwhelming. Your son's signature is everywhere. Defending him will be virtually impossible." He declined taking the case with kindness, claiming he already had too many pending cases. I left his office feeling like I had been doused with a bucket of ice water, but I didn't give up. I visited a second firm, then a third. The answers were similar. They looked at me with compassion and shook their heads upon seeing the thick file. A young lawyer, perhaps due to lack of experience, was brutally honest with me. "Mrs. Vance, your son is the perfect scapegoat. No jury is going to believe that a grown man signed so many documents without reading them. Accepting this case would only cause you to lose money and tarnish my victory record." At the end of the day, I returned home in a state of total hopelessness. The heavy iron door opened, and the only thing that greeted me was a terrifying silence. The house that Nia Imani and I had built together now felt strange and cold. On the coffee table in the living room, the cardboard sign that Jelani had been making with such effort the previous afternoon was still there. The scribbled phrase, "Welcome home, Daddy," was painted in bright colors like a bitter mockery of the tragedy that had just occurred. I let myself fall onto the sofa, staring at the list of law firms in my notebook, all now crossed out with furious ink strokes. Hope had been extinguished. Just at that moment, the doorbell rang. I didn't want to see anyone, but the bell kept ringing, insistent, determined. Reluctantly, I dragged myself to the door. Standing in front of it was a woman of about 40. She dressed simply, jeans and a shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. But what caught my attention most were her eyes, sharp, intelligent eyes that conveyed unusual determination. "Mrs. Eudora Vance?" she asked in a firm, clear voice. I nodded, still wondering who she was. "I am Detective Zuri Banks," she introduced herself, showing a police badge. "I belong to the cybercrimes unit, and I have been tracking Nia Imani for a long time." Hearing the name Nia Imani come out of a stranger's mouth startled me. I took a step back and invited her in. We sat in the living room right next to that welcome sign that now seemed like a curse. Zuri didn't go straight to the point like Detective Thorne. She asked me about Kwesi, what he liked to eat, what his personality was like, how his carpentry work was going. Those questions didn't sound like an interrogation, but rather a genuine attempt to know the real Kwesi. After a while, seeing that I felt calmer, she said, "Mrs. Vance, I read the case file. My experience tells me that the leaders of these organizations never get their hands dirty. They always choose someone with a clean record, someone trusting, and most importantly, with little financial knowledge to use as a front. Your son," she paused and looked me straight in the eye, "fits that description perfectly." She held my gaze as if wanting to convey confidence. "I believe Kwesi is innocent, but the belief of a cop like me is worth nothing in court. We need proof, concrete proof." For the first time in 2 days, a small and fragile spark of hope shone in my darkness. "But what can we do? Nia Imani fled. She erased all traces." "She left in too much of a hurry," Zuri said firmly, without a shred of doubt. "People like Nia Imani are arrogant. They think they are smarter than everyone, that they deleted everything, but they usually leave small mistakes where they feel safest, right here in this house." She stood up, glancing around the living room with the analytical eyes of an investigator examining a scene. "I can't ask for an official search warrant because we don't have enough legal grounds. All the superficial evidence is against your son, but," she turned to me, "with your permission, we can investigate on our own. Cooperate with me, ma'am. For justice for Kwesi." Justice for Kwesi. Those words ran through my exhausted body like an electric current. I nodded without hesitation. My voice regained its strength. "What do you want me to do?" Zuri's gaze settled on the hallway leading to the bedrooms and the study at the back of the house. During the time she lived here, was there any place Nia Imani considered her territory? A space where even you didn't usually enter? I didn't have to think for a second. "Her home office," I replied immediately. She always kept the door locked. She said she needed absolute silence to be able to create. Zuri nodded with an almost imperceptible smile on her lips. Then, we'll start there. I led Detective Zuri down the hallway. The oak door of the office stood imposing at the end of the corridor. Out of habit, I reached out to turn the brass doorknob. It was completely locked. It didn't move an inch. "It's always like this," I whispered. Zuri didn't flinch. She set her bag on the floor and pulled out a small leather kit with very professional movements. Upon opening it, several fine, shiny metal tools appeared. She looked at me sideways, noticed the surprise in my eyes, and smiled discreetly. "It's an extra skill every investigator should have. Sometimes justice is behind a closed door." She knelt and began to work quickly and silently. Only the soft click of metal inside the lock could be heard. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Less than a minute later, a small click was heard, a faint sound, but absolutely definitive. The door creaked open. Zuri pushed it and entered, and I followed. A breath of cold air smelling of new paper and expensive air freshener greeted us immediately. The room appeared before my eyes as proof of Nia Imani's obsessive meticulousness. Everything was ordered to the point of seeming sterile. The walnut desk shone without a speck of dust, the laptop closed with precision, the books aligned by spine color from white to black, like a rainbow drained of life. That clinical order contrasted brutally with the shattered chaos of my life at that moment and gave me chills. Zuri put on some rubber gloves and handed me a pair. "Mrs. Vance, you live here. You know better than I do how Nia Imani organized everything. Look for anything that looks out of place, any object that doesn't fit." We began the search in silence. I went to the shelf, checking the books one by one, hoping to find something tucked inside, a sheet, a memory card. But there was nothing, just books on art, design, and business. Zuri, on the other hand, focused on the desk, the heart of the room. She opened each drawer methodically. The first was full of luxury office supplies, gold-plated fountain pens, notepads with Nia Imani's company logo. The second contained contracts, legal business documents, the perfect facade of a successful businesswoman. I approached the white-painted steel filing cabinet in the corner. I pulled the top drawer. There were no papers inside, but several leather-bound photo albums. Out of curiosity, I opened one. I felt a cold pang in my heart. They were photos of Kwesi and Nia Imani's wedding, my son's radiant smile next to the woman who had sent him to prison. On the next page, an image of Jelani as a newborn, tiny and red in his mother's arms. Nia Imani had kept those memories carefully, as if she really were a part of this family, or maybe it was just another fragment of her perfect facade. "Come look at this." Zuri's voice snapped me out of my trance. She was checking the bottom drawer of the desk. It was almost empty. It only had a few paper clips, but she wasn't looking at the contents. She was tapping the bottom of the drawer gently with her fingers. The sound was deeper and denser than in other parts. Something wasn't right. She pulled out a tool thin as a box cutter. She slid it deftly along the edge of the pressed wood bottom. She lifted it carefully. The cover popped up, revealing a secret compartment underneath. And there, in the middle of that dark space, was a small black velvet bag. Zuri lifted it carefully, placed it on the table, and gently poured out its contents. I felt my heart stop. Every object that came out under the light looked like a piece of a nightmare. 5 cheap mobile phones, the basic kind that only serve for calling without internet access. The type of phones criminals usually use and discard. Dozens of SIM cards carefully wrapped in small Ziploc bags. On each bag, Nia Imani's neat handwriting had written a country name: Germany, France, England, Italy, and 2 identical black leather notebooks. My gloved hand trembled as I picked one up. I opened the first page. Inside were lines written by hand by Nia Imani with delicate, perfectly ordered calligraphy. A long list of names: Elsa Schmidt, 81, Germany; Jean-Pierre Logan, 79, France; Maria Rossi, 85, Italy. Next to each name, a long series of numbers. Zuri looked over my shoulder, her voice hardened with rage. Here is the list of victims. Most are over 70 years old, elderly people, alone. Those numbers must be bank accounts or the amount of money they stole. Just at that moment, when Zuri picked up the second notebook to check it, a thick envelope that was between the pages fell to the floor. I bent down to pick it up. It wasn't sealed. I pulled out the stack of photos inside. They weren't family photos. They were images of Nia Imani in elegant clothes, sitting in five-star hotel meeting rooms next to very suspicious-looking foreign men. She was toasting, shaking hands, smiling with them. I flipped to a photo and froze. In it, Nia Imani was next to a tall man in a black suit with a long, ugly scar on his right cheek. That face, that scar. I remembered it well. I had seen him on the news a few months ago. He was an international fraudster wanted intensely by the FBI. Zuri took the photo from my trembling hand. She observed the face of the man with the scar carefully. Then she looked at the other photos. Her eyes shone with a cold, sharp spark. "This doesn't just prove she's involved," she said in a grave tone. "This proves that Nia Imani is not just any scammer. She is a key piece, someone with power within this organization." Detective Zuri carefully stored everything we found in a special sealed police bag. "I have to take this to the lab immediately," she said with an urgent but controlled voice. "My team will analyze the data from the phones and the SIMs. It will take a little time, but we will find something for sure. Stay here and act normally. Do not speak of this to anyone, not even your closest loved ones. Your safety is the most important thing." She left as quickly as she arrived, leaving me alone in Nia Imani's room. I stood there feeling both disgust and relief. Disgust for the double face of that daughter-in-law I once loved. Relief, because finally, after so much despair, we had something to hold on to, a weapon to fight with. I began to tidy up what we had disturbed, trying to return everything to its original place. I put the drawer bottom back. I aligned the books on the shelf. My hand passed over the expensive objects, the refined decorations, all bought with money ripped from the elderly. I felt nausea rise in my throat. After finishing, I went out to the front porch to breathe some fresh air, trying to shake off that false smell of the room. The evening light was soft, but not enough to warm the frozen soul I carried inside. Just at that moment, I saw Mrs. Opaline Chesterton, the neighbor who has lived next to my house for over 20 years, watering some pots of bougainvillea in front of her porch. Upon seeing me, she immediately put down the watering can. Her face showed concern. "Eudora! Lord have mercy, I finally found you. I heard. The neighbors won't stop talking. What happened to the boy? To Kwesi? This morning I saw a police car in front of your house." Seeing her kind face, full of goodness, and that sincere concern in her wrinkled eyes, the wall of emotions I had tried to build came crashing down. Tears burst forth, tears of helplessness and fear. I told her everything, that Kwesi had been arrested unjustly on absurd accusations. I only omitted the detail of Detective Zuri's secret investigation. Mrs. Opaline remained silent, listening attentively, while her thin hands patted my back softly to console me. When I finished speaking, she stayed thoughtful for a good while, staring into the void. Suddenly she grabbed my hand, pulled me closer, and lowered her voice as if fearing someone might hear us. "Eudora, listen to me. I have something to tell you. Maybe it will help." About 2 weeks ago, one night when I couldn't sleep, old age things, I went out to the porch to get some air. I saw Nia Imani, your daughter-in-law, standing by the gate, talking to a strange man. He was tall, and I remember very well. He had a long scar on his cheek. My heart began to pound in my chest. The man with the scar from the photo. Mrs. Opaline continued recalling. They were speaking in low voices, but since it was early morning and everything was silent, I managed to hear a few words. I saw Nia Imani hand him a thick envelope and tell him, "The package for Frankfurt." He nodded and replied something that I don't know why stuck with me. "The widow from Detroit is already clean." At the time it seemed strange to me, but then I forgot it. Now that you tell me this, I remembered. The widow from Detroit. Clean, I murmured. That was a code, without a doubt. The widow from Detroit was perhaps a victim, and clean must be a code to say the deception was completed. I woke up suddenly. There was a witness, someone who could confirm that Nia Imani had ties to the fugitive criminal. That was the key piece to destroy the defense that Kwesi acted alone. Mrs. Opaline. I squeezed her hand tight. My voice trembled with emotion. Could you accompany me to the precinct? Your testimony is crucial. You can save Kwesi. She didn't hesitate for a second. She looked at me firmly. Of course, honey. For Kwesi? I love him like a grandson. I ran into the house to get the car keys. Mrs. Opaline sat in the passenger seat. We left that familiar street where we had lived in peace for so many years. I drove with one hand, while with the other I tried to call Zuri to give her the good news, but she didn't answer. Maybe she was busy in the lab. I decided to go straight to the precinct. When we took the main avenue, a white truck with no logo or sign appeared suddenly from a side street. It shot out like a wild beast, its lights aimed straight at my eyes. A blinding glare left me completely in the dark. I only managed to hear the tearing scream of Mrs. Opaline next to me and the horrific sound of metal colliding. Then everything turned to darkness. A strong smell of disinfectant invaded my nose, pungent and unpleasant. I tried to open my eyes. My head hurts as if it were being split with a hammer. The white hospital light hurts my eyes. I am lying in a bed with an IV in my arm. Zuri is standing next to me. Her face is tight as a rope. She no longer has that usual calm. Her normal clothes were replaced by her police uniform. "You're awake," she said in a grave voice. "You only suffered a mild concussion and some bruises." "Will Mrs. Opaline be okay?" I asked with a dry throat. Every word hurt coming out. Zuri remained silent for a second that felt like a century. She avoided looking me in the eyes. "The woman who was with you did not survive. We are very sorry. The truck fled the scene. We are looking for it." My world collapsed again. I burst into tears. Hot tears ran down my cheeks. Tears of fear, of pain for losing such a good neighbor, and of unbearable rage. Between sobs, I told Zuri what Mrs. Opaline had told me about the man with the scar, about the package, and the widow from Detroit. Zuri put a firm hand on my shoulder, giving me strength with that simple gesture. "Mrs. Vance, do you understand now? They don't just scam. They are willing to kill to silence those who know too much. This fight is no longer just for your son." At that moment, I knew she was right. The fear I felt turned into hate. I wasn't going to give up. I was going to fight for Kwesi and for Mrs. Opaline, the brave neighbor who paid too high a price for telling the truth. The next 2 days in the hospital felt like 2 years. The physical pain from the bruises and constant dizziness didn't compare to the mental torment. Zuri came often, not only to update me on the investigation, but also to ensure my protection. There was always a plainclothes officer at the door of my room, watching day and night. His silent presence made me feel safe, but also reminded me that danger was very close. In moments alone, guilt drowned me. If I hadn't taken Mrs. Opaline in the car, if we had been more careful, if I had called a taxi instead of driving myself, thousands of ifs swirled in my head. On one of her visits, seeing me sitting unresponsive, Zuri put her hand on my shoulder and told me firmly, "Mrs. Vance, don't blame yourself anymore. They were already after her. Maybe they saw her talking to you. Maybe they were already watching the house. Sooner or later, they were going to act. The fault isn't yours. The fault belongs to those bastards." Mrs. Opaline's funeral was held while I was still in the hospital. Her son, a middle-aged man living in another city, called me on the phone. He didn't reproach me for anything. He only thanked me for being with his mother in her last moments. I asked Verna to order a large wreath of flowers. On the black ribbon, I wrote with my own hand, "For a brave neighbor, justice will be done." It wasn't just a promise to Mrs. Opaline. It was an oath to myself. The day I was discharged, it was Zuri herself who came to pick me up in her car. On the way home, while the car moved through streets I knew so well, she gave me the first piece of good news. "We found the truck," she said, staring at the road. The driver rented it with fake documents, but he made a stupid mistake. He paid for the rental with a credit card. Even though that card was also fake, created with stolen information, the transaction left a digital trail that my team couldn't ignore. Zuri explained that the cybercrimes investigation team she leads had followed that trail to a seedy internet cafe in a working-class area on the outskirts of Atlanta. Thanks to the security cameras there, they managed to get a clear image of the suspect at the exact moment he was making the online transaction. And that face, Zuri said, with a tone of satisfaction impossible to hide, matches perfectly with a profile in the FBI database. His real name is Darius Scar Mitchell. He's a thug serving criminal organizations with a record for assault and extortion. And do you know what else? His most distinctive feature is a long scar on his right cheek. Only a few hours after confirming his identity, the police raided a cheap motel where Darius was hiding. He offered no resistance, as if he already knew that day was coming. Zuri took me back home, made sure everything was in order, and then went back to the precinct to participate directly in the interrogation. That same night she called me to tell me what happened. At first he was like a stone, Zuri recounted. He repeated the same phrase over and over again. It was a traffic accident. I got scared and ran. He insisted he didn't know who Nia Imani was and had no connection to any criminal ring. He played the role of a scared truck driver perfectly. They interrogated him for 24 hours straight. The most experienced investigators took turns interrogating him using all kinds of tactics, from the hardest to the softest, but they couldn't get anything out of him. Finally, I decided to try something different, Zuri said, in a more serious tone. I didn't enter the room as a police inspector anymore. I entered with some photos. She had printed in color the photos of the victims she found in Nia Imani's notebook. Elderly, kind people, smiling with their grandchildren in family photos. She placed them on the metal table, right in front of Darius. She began to speak in a quiet voice, but with words sharp as knives. This is Mrs. Schmidt, 82 years old, from Berlin. All her retirement money disappeared. She had to sell the house where she lived her whole life and move to a state nursing home. She pushed another photo. This is Mr. Dubois, 78 years old, from France. He was a widower. After realizing he had given all his assets to scammers, he took his own life. Widower. Clean, I whispered on the phone. Mrs. Opaline's words. Zuri continued. She placed a portrait photo of Mrs. Opaline on top. And this is Mrs. Opaline Chesterton, 65 years old, a kind neighbor. You killed her just for accidentally hearing a conversation she shouldn't have heard. She had 3 grandchildren waiting for her at home. Finally, Zuri looked him straight in the eyes with an icy voice. If you cooperate and give up the mastermind, you will only face charges for vehicular manslaughter and could access a sentence reduction under the law. If not, we will make sure you bear full responsibility for the death of Mrs. Opaline with a charge of premeditated murder, plus a long list of crimes for complicity and fraud. You are going to die in prison, Darius. The stone began to crack. Darius lowered his head in silence for a long time. The ticking of the clock in the interrogation room became deafening. Finally, he looked up and began to speak. He confessed he had been hired by Nia Imani. He was the man with the scar Mrs. Opaline had seen. At first, they only ordered him to scare her so she would stay quiet, maybe breaking into her house or damaging her car. But seeing that we were driving hurriedly toward the precinct, he got scared and called Nia Imani. The order was to act with more force. And then he revealed the most important information, a card up his sleeve that no one expected. Nia Imani, she is very cautious, Darius said with a hoarse voice. She has something she calls insurance. An external hard drive. Everything is there. A complete list of victims, recordings of scam calls, money transfer schemes, and most importantly, recordings of internal meetings of the whole ring where the voices of the ringleaders are heard. She said if anything happened to her, that would be published automatically. Where is that hard drive? Zuri asked insistently. Darius shook his head. I don't know, but she never separated from it. It was her life. If you find Nia Imani, you will find that drive. Immediately, Zuri's technical team got to work. They analyzed the last calls Darius had made before being arrested. Most were irrelevant, but there were some unregistered numbers of the burner type communicating with him very often. Following the weak signal of one of those numbers, they managed to locate her last location, a secluded cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, almost an hour north of the city. A heavily armed SWAT team was sent immediately. They didn't burst in at once, but set up a silent perimeter cutting off all escape routes. Zuri called me at dawn. "Mrs. Vance, we found her. Come, you deserve to witness this." She sent a car for me. We didn't go directly to the cabin, but stopped at a mobile command center. In reality, a large van equipped with screens and cutting-edge technology parked a few blocks from the target, hidden behind some trees. The atmosphere inside was tense. Technicians were glued to monitors. Only keys clicking and brief, precise conversations could be heard. Sitting there, I could hear my heart beating fast. The nightmare of so many days was about to end. Zuri handed me some headphones. "We've intercepted the cell signal inside the house. Listen." With trembling hands, I put them on. After a few seconds of static, a familiar, cutting voice made itself heard. It was Nia Imani. "Yes, they arrested Darius, an idiot. He thought he was tough, but turned out to be soft. But it doesn't matter." A male voice responded on the other side, raspy, somewhat nervous. Nia Imani let out a sarcastic laugh that I could imagine perfectly without needing to see her. "Don't worry, everything is in my husband's name, Kwesi. He's a lovesick fool. A few fake tears are enough, and he believes everything. Now he's in prison for me, taking the fall for all the crimes. Let the police tear apart the entire state. They won't find me. The hard drive is still here, completely safe. It's our life." A lovesick fool. That phrase was like a stab straight to the heart. I clenched my fists tightly. My nails dug into my skin. Rage invaded me completely, consuming any trace of fear. That witch had not only destroyed my son's life, but she had trampled on his love and trust in the cruelest way. Zuri looked at me sideways, noticing the fire in my eyes. Her gaze lit up. She said nothing, only nodded silently to the SWAT team leader beside her. Through the radio, I heard the order in a cold, determined voice. "All units, move in." On the main screen, the image from a drone hovering over the house appeared clearly. I saw shadows dressed in tactical gear, moving fast like ghosts, surrounding the cabin from all angles. They are the ghosts of justice. The front door was battered down. Nia Imani's desperate screams were heard. Some noises of things breaking. It all happened in less than a minute, fast and effective. The commander reported over the radio with a voice showing no emotion. "Target secured, external hard drive and several mobile phones found. Zone secure." They brought Nia Imani out with her hands cuffed behind her back. She no longer had that expression of superiority. Her hair was messy, clothes a disaster. Passing in front of the command vehicle where we were, her gaze crossed by chance with the window. She saw me. For an instant, her eyes opened with surprise, but immediately filled with fierce hatred, like a cornered snake. But she said nothing. The police put her in the car and took her away, disappearing into the darkness. Only a few hours later, with the irrefutable evidence of the hard drive and the recording of her confession, the release order for Kwesi was signed immediately. I went to the detention center to pick up my son. When the heavy, old metal door opened with a tearing screech, Kwesi walked out. A few days in prison had destroyed him. He looked thinner, gaunt, with an unkempt beard and deep circles under his eyes, but his eyes no longer reflected hopelessness. Instead, there was a painful emptiness. He didn't say a word, just walked quickly toward me and hugged me tightly. I felt his shoulders shake. I hugged him hard, stroking his back like when he was a child. On the way back, he finally spoke, voice hoarse from not speaking for days. "I can't believe it, Mama. The person I loved most, the mother of my son, could do something like this to me. How could I be so blind?" When we arrived at the house, Verna had already brought Jelani. The boy was sitting on the sofa with a sad expression, but upon seeing Kwesi enter, his eyes lit up. He shouted, "Daddy!" with a clear voice and ran like an arrow toward his father's open arms. Kwesi knelt, hugged his little one tightly, and buried his face in his soft head. Seeing that scene, I knew the worst nightmare of my life was over, but I also knew my son had changed forever. The scar on his heart would never fully heal. He looked at me, and his eyes were now full of unbreakable determination. "It's over. I'm getting a divorce," he said firmly. "I'm going to fight for full custody of Jelani. I won't let my son grow up with a mother like that." A few weeks later, on the day of the first trial, the Atlanta sky was gray. I, Kwesi, and Detective Zuri were sitting in the front row reserved for witnesses and involved persons. Kwesi wore a formal suit, but his face was still gaunt. He sat upright, with his gaze fixed ahead, unwavering. The courtroom was spacious, solemn, with old oak benches and the national seal hanging high behind the judge. The atmosphere was charged with tension. Journalists filled the back seats, their cameras looking like black cannons aiming straight at the dock. The transnational fraud case, with implications of murder, had shaken the country, and Nia Imani was the center of all attention. The side door opened. 2 officers escorted Nia Imani inside. She wore a loose gray prisoner uniform. She looked much thinner and paler. Her once shiny hair was now hurriedly pulled back at the nape, revealing a discolored forehead. She walked with her eyes glued to the floor, not daring to look at us even once. Darius Scar Mitchell and the other accomplices of the ring were also brought in, sitting on the accused bench next to her. The scar on Darius's cheek looked even more intimidating under the courtroom light. I was called as the first witness. When I stood up, all eyes in the room locked on me. I took a deep breath, put my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a firm, cutting voice, began to ask me about daily life with Nia Imani, about the suspicious signs that in my naivety I overlooked. I told everything, from the secret calls at night, the overly expensive luxury items, to that fatal phrase about using Kwesi's account so the money would look cleaner. When I recounted in detail how, together with Detective Zuri, we discovered the small black velvet bag in the secret drawer and the notebooks with the names of the elderly victims, the room fell completely silent. I could feel the indignation spreading in the air. Nia Imani's defense attorney, a sly type, tried to insinuate that I was prejudiced against my daughter-in-law to diminish the value of my testimony. "Mrs. Vance," he asked in a suggestive tone, "isn't it true that you never really accepted your daughter-in-law, a young, successful, independent woman, and that this testimony is nothing more than an exaggerated interpretation of a mother who wants to protect her son at all costs?" I looked him straight in the eye. My voice no longer trembled. It was firm and sure. I loved Nia Imani like a daughter. I felt proud of her, but my imagination couldn't have invented dozens of SIM cards from all over Europe, nor could it have invented a list of elderly people who were scammed until they had nothing left. And certainly my imagination couldn't have fabricated the photos where she appears next to internationally wanted criminals. Murmurs were heard in the room. The lawyer was left speechless and asked no more. In the following days, the evidence from the hard drive was presented. They were devastating blows impossible to deny. The recordings were played before the court. Nia Imani's arrogant voice resonated throughout the room, betraying her and her accomplices. Everyone held their breath, hearing the coldly discussed plans to scam, the repugnant laughter while bragging about the money they had stolen. Then it was Nia Imani's turn. She stood up with her fragile figure. Everyone thought she would deny everything, blame circumstances, but no. Instead, she decided to confess everything. Her voice was monotone, without emotion, as if reading a report on someone else's life. She told that 2 years ago, after failing in a cryptocurrency investment, she had been left with a huge debt to loan sharks. They threatened to harm not only her, but also Kwesi and Jelani. "It was then," she said, looking at a lost point, "that a partner approached me. They promised to pay the debt and give me a comfortable life on the condition that I participate in their project. At first, she thought she would only help with a few minor transactions. Then she recounted in more detail how they operated, hunting lonely elderly people on social media and forums. We created fake, sweet